Dan, you're on.
Hello, everyone. This is Jan Katsu speaking. Before we get to the content for today, I wanted to take a moment to consider the context for today. I suspect it's the case that some of you, maybe even all of you, this morning, like me, was listening to the news and hearing about Tunisia and realizing that today is the day in which, after their apparent first free and open elections, they will learn who has been elected and begin the process of putting pen to paper or mouse to computer and composing their own understanding of the founding of their free state. And I just think it is incredibly poignant and timely that today we're going to be taking a look at the Megillat Ha'atzmaut, at the Declaration, or Hachzarat La'atzmaut, the proclamation of independence of the State of Israel. Perhaps it's the case that in the United States we take all too for granted the pregnancy, the poignancy, the power of a nation being born. And I did not want it lost on us that today, albeit in its own image, very different from the image of the founding of the State of Israel, Tunisia is reforming and founding itself anew. I'd appreciate it if you would join with me in the blessing for sacred study, because even though we are not in the classic sense going to be studying texts from Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim from the Tanakh, we are going to be studying texts that are sacred to our people. So if you feel so inclined, please join me. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the world, who has given us mitzvot and commanded us to engage in words of Torah. The words that are now in front of you are originally from Yehuda Halevi, 11th century poet par excellence, arguably the greatest of medieval Hebrew poets. And this is a relatively new translation from Hillel Halkin. One of the things that I enjoy doing in the context of the webinars, in particular the Torah Alive webinars that I've been privileged to participate in, is to make some recommendations for further study and learning. Hillel Halkin's book entitled Yehuda Halevi, published I think just in the last year or two, is really an exceptional book. It is actually published in 2010 by Schocken, and it, in addition to providing translations of extraordinary poetry by Yehuda Halevi, tells a great deal about his own biography as well as the historical context in which he lived. So I commend it to you highly. It is eminently readable, and I think an exceptionally important book to not only understand Halevi, but to understand part of what it is that kept the dream of a state of Israel, of the people of Israel returning to the land of Israel, alive, even when the prospect seemed so remote. The translation here for Libi B'Mizrach is, my heart is in the east, but the rest of me far in the west. He was writing this, of course, in Spain at the time, in Andalusia, when he was yet dreaming of a trek that he would indeed make to the land of Israel. How can I savor this life, even taste what I eat? How in the chains of a Moor Zion bound to the cross, can I do what I've vowed to and must? Gladly I'd leave all the best of grand Spain for one glimpse of Jerusalem's dust. This is probably the most famous, most translated pericope or section of Halevi's poetry. And I bring it here because I think it evokes something elemental and sacred of the spirit that provided a context for Megillat Ha'atzmaut, for the declaration of Israel's independence. Please continue with the next slide. I suspect that many of you have had a chance to learn about Israel through its maps, through geography over time. If not, then I would suggest either that you consider looking at the work of Martin Gilbert, some of which actually was incorporated into an article or series of articles that RJ Magazine published a few years ago. It really is a very telling narrative just to look at the maps of the land of Israel and the state of Israel since its inception to begin to discern how it is that Israel has evolved over time and become indeed the axis mundi, which is the center of the world, really, politically speaking, as well as, sadly, militarily and culturally speaking, of the Jewish people. On the left-hand side of the page, of the slide, more accurately, you should be able to see the adopted partition plan of the states of Israel, the binational state that led to, historically, the war, which we would call, as Jews, Milchemet HaShichrur, the War of Independence. And as I suspect many of you who are listening know, from the Palestinian or larger even Arab world perception, the name of this war is quite different. It, instead of being War of Independence, is understood to be Nakba, a catastrophe, the exact antithesis of independence, a reminder yet that even the moniker, the name given to a particular battle in history can provide great and sometimes painful insight into the diametrically opposed perspectives of its combatants. On the right-hand side of the page, you can see this is really, to an extent, the before and after portrait of before the War of Independence and after the War of Independence. And both of these are indicative of what it is that the state of Israel became as a consequence of, in this case, the Arab decision not to accept the partition plan and to engage in what was really a titanic struggle for the birth of the state of Israel. And it's important to note that the declaration of the state of Israel was taking place in the context, really the cauldron of war. If we can go to the next slide, please. In just a moment, I am going to ask that we unmute everyone because I'd like to get some insight from you in terms of your understanding of why it would be that the Declaration of Independence would be included in not just any Siddur, but the Siddur of the Reform movement, Mishkan Tfilah. To the best of my knowledge, and I've checked with several other theologians and scholars, no one else with whom I've spoken is aware of the Declaration of Independence being incorporated into any siddur, into any Jewish prayer book. So without any further ado, and this isn't a trick question, it's not as though someone knows the answer necessarily, although perhaps if you're an editor of Mishkan Tefillah, you may have some insight into the deliberations that led to this decision. But I would be fascinated to learn from you why you think it would be appropriate for the incorporation of Israel's Declaration of Independence into a siddur generally and into a siddur for the Reform movement in particular.
Jan, before we do that, we do have a question. When David Ben-Gurion declared independence, was he prepared to accept the non-contiguous borders that the partition called for?
A totally appropriate question. I'm actually going to be, in the course of our conversation, I'm going to be reading some of the reflections of people, including Ben-Gurion, that led to this declaration. In general, though, because I want to honor the question, from all I have read, there was more than an incipient or inchoate understanding that this
Muted.
going to be acceptable to the Arab world in particular, and as probably the questioner knows, it wasn't acceptable to at least some members of the Jewish people. Remember, the Jews were not united at this time politically or even militarily. It was almost literally a shotgun wedding that brought the elements of the Jewish fighting force together in order to fight and ultimately, in some respects, defeat the Arab armies that surrounded it. But I do want to focus us, at least for the next couple of minutes, on why you think Mishkan Tefillah would be the inaugural siddur for the inclusion of Megillat Ha'atzmaut, Israel's Declaration of Independence.
We have one comment that was typed in.
Great, let's hear it, because I don't see it.
Of the Declaration of Independence in Mishkan Tefillah, it speaks to the importance of the progressive reform religious movement to the reform community in the U.S. I'm assuming that that means the Israeli progressive movement.
Okay, for some reason I'm having great difficulty seeing this. Let's see.
It was in the question.
Yeah, I'm looking, trying to. On inclusion of the Declaration of the Mishkan Tefillah, it speaks the importance of progressive reform religious movement in the community in the U.S. Yes, and I would agree. And I also think that it is the height of irony that a movement which initially was opposed to understanding the Jewish people as an entity, and that ultimately this is evidence of reform. This is a concrete display of how the reform movement adapts, responds, and reforms. That we have come literally full circle from at our inception, really excising peoplehood from Judaism, to fully endorsing it, incorporating it into our tefillot. Absolutely, I would second that perception. Any other reason that anyone can think of for including this document, the Declaration of Independence, in our siddur?
If you'd like to speak, let's go ahead and have you raise your hand, and I'll unmute you.
Okay. Anyone? All right. If something comes to you, a light bulb goes on, please feel free in the course of our learning together to suggest your perception of the inclusion of at least excerpts from the Declaration of Independence into the Mishkan Tefillah. For an emotional initial context. Yes?
Is this the first Siddur after the mission statement reference Israel and its support? I'm not sure I understand the question, Peter.
This is certainly not the first Siddur that has been created since the founding of the State of Israel. And it's not even in Israeli Siddurim. I mean, we need to know that when I'm speaking of Mishkan Tefillah, I'm not only speaking of Siddurim that are used in Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, and Reconstructionist, and Renewal congregations in the United States. This is, to the best of my knowledge, anywhere, internationally, the first place in which the Declaration of Independence has been sanctified, consecrated, if you will, in such a fashion. I'd like to read briefly from a quote by Golda Meir that preceded her walking up to sign the Declaration of Independence in Tel Aviv. At this point, her name was Golda Meyerson. It later became Meir. And she said this: "From my childhood in America, I learned about the Declaration of Independence and the geniuses who signed it. I couldn't imagine these were real people doing something real. And here I am signing it, actually signing a Declaration of Independence. I didn't think it was due me that I, Goldie Mabovich Meyerson, deserved it, that I had lived to see the day. My hand shook. We had done it. We had brought the Jewish people into existence. Whatever price any of us would have to pay for it, we had recreated the Jewish national home. The long exile was over. Now we were a nation like other nations, masters for the first time in 20 centuries of our own destiny. All I can recall about my actual signing of the proclamation is that I was crying openly, not able even to wipe the tears from my face. David Pincus asked me why I was crying, and I said, 1, because of the honor, and 2, because there are people missing here who had more of a right to be here and to sign. I wept almost beyond control." And I think that provides, as I said before, an emotional context, but even more, an understanding of how this document was representative of the weight, that's the koved, and the honor, the kavod, of a couple of thousand years since the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And as a consequence, one of the constructs that has been a challenge certainly for the Reform movement, and again the height of irony that this document would be included in the Reform Siddur, is exile, because the people who had signed the Declaration of Independence in many respects had regarded living outside the land of Israel as being in exile, and that is not, or has not been, the experience of the Reform movement or of liberal Jews. And you'll see here that even in this very first paragraph, which was one of the last paragraphs actually added by Ben-Gurion, supposedly the night before this declaration was signed, Eretz Yisrael was the birthplace of the Jewish people. After being forcibly exiled from their land, the people remained faithful to it through their dispersion, and never ceased to pray and hope for their return to it and for the restoration in it of their political freedom. Now here we have very consciously two terms which represent two ideas that are juxtaposed: exile and dispersion. Dispersion, I think, sounds remarkably almost neither positive nor negative. It simply is a biological or sociological or geographical fact, whereas exile is a term that is typically contrasted with home. And so one of the acts of genius, if you want to call it that, of Ben-Gurion, and as I said, probably this was written the night before the Declaration itself was promulgated and signed, was to juxtapose two perceptions of Jewish life. One that was treating Israel as the home of the Jewish people, not just the birthplace of the Jewish people, but that anywhere outside of the land of Israel was living in exile. That's the orientation of Yehuda Halevi that we read before. He was really the first person, at least the first that I found in the context of all medieval writing, both poets and Jewish thinkers, who treated everywhere outside of Israel as exile. Others spoke of it in terms of dispersion. But exile is a very different worldview from dispersion. And here Ben-Gurion incorporates both of them. A Song of Ascents, Shir HaMa'alot. This is on the exact same page as the beginning of the Declaration of Independence in Mishkan Tefillah. So I'd be interested in knowing, take a moment, read this Song of Ascents, and suggest why is it that our leaders, our theologians, our liturgists chose to juxtapose the beginning of the Declaration of Independence with Psalm 122. Let's go to the next slide then, unless there are any comments. What do you think it's doing here?
And I didn't see anybody raise their hand, so we're good.
All right. Briefly, on this page, I wanted just to incorporate a couple of other contextual comments, things that led to the Declaration of Independence from multiple perspectives. One, Theodor Herzl, the capturing of what had been, so to speak, a legendary dream, and that the people literally who were involved in signing the Declaration of Independence were carrying that dream that led in part to Golda Meir's and others' senses that they were not just signing their own names, they were literally, as it were, signing the names of their forebears, including, maybe most especially, Theodor Herzl. Albert Einstein, whatever we do for the land of Israel, we do it for the honor and well-being of the whole Jewish people. Einstein, as some of you may know, was considered very seriously as a candidate for the first president of the state of Israel. And he represents, in this context, as well as others, a kind of an international Zionism with the understanding that the people and of Israel transcend the land of Israel. Next slide, please. Israel, the ideal, is profoundly different from the reality of Israel. And this isn't true just in 2011. It was true clearly in 1947 and 1948 during the gestation period of the state of Israel. And I think it is important to take a moment and read this excerpt in the following context. Impelled by this historic and traditional attachment, Jews strove in every successive generation to reestablish themselves in their ancient homeland. In recent decades, they returned to their masses. They returned in their masses, pioneers, immigrants coming to Eretz Yisrael in defiance of restrictive legislation, and defenders. They made the desert bloom revived the Hebrew language, built villages and towns, and creating a thriving community, controlling its own economy and culture, loving peace, but knowing how to defend itself, bringing the blessings of progress to all the country's inhabitants, and aspiring towards independent nationhood. It is incredibly important, and maybe arguably even more so for liberal and reform Jews than for others, to be aware that Zionism was not born in 1947 or 48, but that it indeed has echoes that reverberate through Jewish time from, as you see at the bottom of the page, Avot Rabbi Natan, which is probably the second or third century of the Common Era, as well as really throughout the chain of Jewish tradition, and in particular beginning after Moshe Hess and Theodor Herzl in the mid-19th century. And that the historical context, diachronically, that is to say, over time, it was extremely important for the signers of the Declaration of Independence to be explicit about whose shoulders, as it were, they were standing on. So it's not just that we stand on the shoulders of biblical commentators and of, Talmudic theologians and poets, but also the people who were engaged in the political birth of the state of Israel were conscious of and indeed proud of the legacy that they were inheriting from the different aliyot, from the different groups of people who fought, lived, and died in an effort to enable them to come to the point of giving birth to the Jewish state. The ideal here, there is no beauty like the beauty of Jerusalem. 10 measures of beauty were given to the world. 9 of them were given to Jerusalem, and 1 was given to the rest of the world. Clearly, this is rabbinic hyperbole. Clearly, this is a way of, during the time at which Israel seemed utterly impossible for the Jews to return to, it kept the dream alive. And again, the juxtaposition of an ancient text. The prior text was Psalm 122 to the beginning of the state of Israel. I think that it's the case that the authors of this Siddur wanted us to know that the dream of Israel transcended the 19th century and indeed transcends Jewish time. And we need continually to recognize the connection over time between the ancient, the medieval, and the contemporary place of the state and of the mindset, really, of Israel. The next slide, please.
And before we move to the next slide, or while we move, Peter asks, is it fair to say that the statements reflect that one can love Israel without living in Israel were before this slide?
I think it is fair to say, and appropriate to say, that people outside the land of Israel, especially during the period in which there was no Jewish sovereignty in Israel, maintained a spiritualized connection to that place. And in the case of Judah Halevi, he regarded it as home, but that was an extreme exception. The more normative stance of Jews during the period from the year 70 of the Common Era to 1948 was one in which it was not a realistic expectation to return to Israel physically. For a very, very small minority was that the case. And up until the advent of Zionism, in particular in the third of the 19th century, the small number of Jews who did live in what we would now call the state, but was then Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, were recipients of what was called the Chalukah. The Chalukah was a worldwide charity that really sustained a remnant in the land of Israel, with the hope that the time would come when that remnant would be joined by aliyot, by people who would choose to come to the land of Israel, rebuild the land of Israel, and sort of reify the love that you described of the land of Israel. Clearly the love never died, even though the realistic expectation of living in Israel was exceptionally remote and rare for about 2,000 years. Aleph Dalet Gordon, for those of you interested, Aaron David Gordon, apparently, among other things, was the subject of the incoming president of the Union for Reform Judaism's rabbinic thesis. Rick Jacobs wrote about Aleph Dalet Gordon, and I suspect we may be hearing a fair amount about him in the course of the next several years. Gordon, among other things, was a naturalist who believed very much in connecting the natural and the supernatural, in bringing literally the soil of Israel and the soul of Israel to the same place, in the same sentence, in the same person. And he was a very powerful writer who was able to connect his own love of the land of Israel in a physical sense with his love of the land of Israel in a spiritual sense. And here he writes, "At times you imagine that you too are taking root in the soil that you are digging. Like all that is growing around, you are nurtured by the light of the sun's rays with food from heaven. You feel that you too live a life in common with the tiniest blade of grass, with each flower, each tree, that you live deeply in the heart of nature, rising up from all and growing straight up into the expanse of the world." And Nomi Shemer's lovely compliment just beneath, "Yerushalayim shel zahav v'shel nechoshet v'shel or, halo l'chol shiraich ani kinor." Jerusalem of gold, built of copper, built of light for your songs. I am a fiddler by day and by night. So again, we have worlds, as it were, coming together, natural and supernatural, over time, somebody who lived several generations ago and somebody who lived in the most recent generation, all of them relating to this place, to this land, as though it is exceptional, extraordinary, and yet not losing its natural gifts, gifts that can be mined literally of gold, copper, etc., and gifts that are supernal, that are divinely given, for example, of light and of song and of poetry. Next slide, please. This also, I think, pertains directly to the question that Peter Shapiro had asked earlier about the relationship of Israel to, in the Jewish mind, as it were, to the rest of the world. The word aliyah is really not the same as immigration. Here in Hebrew we have Medinat Yisrael tehei ptucha la'aliyah yehudit u'lekibutz galuyot. The state of Israel here, and here it's translated, will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. Aliyah is only to the land of Israel. I sometimes might make a joke personally about, Aliyah to Boston because it's a city that I love or something of that nature, but it is purely in jest. Other places, and there is a different word in Hebrew that Ben Yehuda coined, Eliezer Ben Yehuda coined for immigration, then for Aliyah. And this has been one of the sticking points, one of the challenges to the reform movement really since its inception. How are we going to relate to and understand the concept of Aliyah? Here it is in the Declaration of Independence in the context of what is in Hebrew kibbutz galuyot, the ingathering of the exiles. Remember I said before that exile is in contradistinction to home. And so this statement regards Israel as home, as the bayit, as the place in which all of the exiles everywhere else in the world where Jews live can choose to become immediate citizens, immediately at home, so to speak. And it's very clear, Aliyah Yehudit, that it's Jewish Aliyah. So that this was yet one of the other layers which is actually still continuing to be uncovered in the course of the state of Israel's life. How is it that when a Jew moves to the land of Israel, it is understood as qualitatively different from, other than, anybody else moving to the land of Israel? You can say the word Aliyah, and you can say the word exile, but in real life it is clearly proved to be an exceptionally complex challenge for Jews in general, and I think it's fair to say Reform Jews in particular, to relate to Aliyah. If you take a look at even the most recent principles of the Reform movement, you can almost feel the ambivalence, the ambiguity, the indecision with respect to how it is that Jews outside, Reform Jews outside the land of Israel, relate to Jews in the land of Israel. And maybe it's meant to be complex. Maybe it's meant to be continually uncovered for every generation of Jews, and perhaps even more, as I said, every generation of liberal Jews, to wrestle, to live up to our name Yisrael, and to wrestle with what it means to relate to the land of Israel. The quote from Jeremiah that is below, akabetz, is again the concept of ingathering. The ingathering of exiles, kibbutz galuyot, in Hebrew is related to mizug galuyot, to the mixing of exiles, because the way that Israel in many respects has tried to relate to the different ethnic groups that relate to Israel is to wherever possible culturally to find ways to integrate them, rather than to differentiate blocks of ethnic groups within the state of Israel. There's been continuously an attempt to integrate them, so that, for example, the Hebrew language is very often understood to be one of the most important means of integrating people into Israeli life. And I think it's still very poignant when someone, say, from Beta Yisrael, from an Ethiopian provenance, speaks publicly in Hebrew. There is a poignancy, a cogency to saying, I have a different color skin, I have perhaps a different orientation to what it means to identify as a Jew. Nonetheless, I am using the language of our people, and it is who I am, and I am becoming part of it, and at the same time changing the people and the land of Israel. Next slide, please.
And as we go to the next slide, a question from Janet. In gathering of the exiles seems to me to have specific messianic overtones. Am I reading too much into the wording?
No, you can read. It's almost impossible, Janet, to read too much into the wording here. I think at the outset we said that this, from my perspective, is a document which needs to be and is appropriately incorporated into the Siddur as a sacred one. It is literally pregnant with words that ask for and beg for commentary. So yes, Kibbutz Galuyot is echoing the prophet Jeremiah. Remember who Jeremiah was. Jeremiah was lamenting the exile of the impending exile of the people of Israel from the land of Israel. And so the hope right from the outset has been linked to in Jewish time, to the eschaton, to the end of time, to the hope ultimately in which the people of Israel will find shlemut, will find completeness, wholeness, peace, integrity, etc. in the land of Israel, and it's well nigh inextricable from the construct of kibbutz galuyot. And this has been appropriately, I think, a point of tension and contention within not just contemporary Jewish life, but within the Jewish people effectively since our inception. And I think it's appropriate that words, and we're going to see other examples of this, that words that mean something in one generation mean something very different in another generation, and words that may mean for some an immediate association with the messianic, for someone else is reading them and saying, that's not messianic, that is an attempt right now to say, we want to bring as many people as possible from, quote, exile to the land of Israel. And they see it not as a messianic dream in which God is going to have to act, but a political reality that requires economic justice, social justice, and military justice. Here is when Israel, in this phrase, becomes both inspirational and aspirational. The state of Israel will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, and education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. So here we are again, almost deja vu all over again, considering what is happening literally as we speak with respect to the relationship with Israel and the United Nations. On the one hand, Israel can owe its existence as a state to the United Nations. On the other hand, clearly it has been a very painful scenario in which still Israel is regarded as the sole exception, in that it is not given a place at any point in the Security Council, for example, and in many respects is treated as an exceptional, quote, pariah within the United Nations. So it has contradictory, even antithetical relationships to the United Nations, and it is clearly the case, I wrote here, aspiring to realize prophetic dreams. It's clear where the source of those dreams is in, as it says, the prophets of Israel, and yet it also is drawing upon the notion of equality that comes from Locke and Rousseau, that is clearly inspired by the United States, by the United Kingdom, and seeking to recognize that this is not just a place in which we will be quoting Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Proverbs and Psalms, but we will also be quoting the declarations of independence and constitutions, perhaps, of other countries that are seeking to embody, engender, and sponsor the rights politically and socially of all the people who live there. And clearly this is not yet a dream realized. This is a dream that is regarded as potential for the state of Israel. I'm going to let you on your own perhaps read Chaim Hefer's piece at the bottom. But again, I would ask, and perhaps if you in your own kehilot, in your own congregations, utilize this service that relates to Yom HaAtzmaut, to the day of Israel's, celebrating the day of Israel's independence, and wonder about the juxtaposition of contemporary as well as ancient sources to the declaration. Next slide, please.
As we're turning, I have another comment.
Please.
Back to Mishkan Tefillah initial question. The desert Mishkan signifies a place that enabled the people to come together as one, thereby causing the presence of God to dwell among them. It drew all the Israelites together. Could it be that the editors of Mishkan Tefillah wanted to signify that Israel too was a place where all Jews can or should be able to come together as one, thereby truly, got to find the rest of it, experiencing the presence of God among them? And of course, it signifies the importance of Israel by our weekly, if not daily, prayers.
I could only say amen. I mean, I love that. I think that what you wrote is a very thoughtful, poignant commentary. Again, as I think I indicated at the outset, I wasn't asking a question to which I know the answer. I think that it is important for us to raise that question nonetheless because of the singularity, the uniqueness of this Siddur, and something that I think we actually should be not just cognizant of, but quite proud of. And thank you for that commentary. Is it in writing, Joan?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
great. Then I would love perhaps to correspond further with you about it. I know that the people now who are editing in the process of editing the Machzor, the High Holiday prayer book that will be for the Reform movement, may be very interested in these kind of comments. I wanted, as we're coming closer to the end of our learning together, to contextualize the State of Israel, and in particular the Declaration of the State of Israel, by considering some of the eminent, maybe preeminent statements by, in this case, Abraham Joshua Heschel and Elie Wiesel, to recognize that we haven't lost the love, the romance, so to speak, with the State of Israel, just because it has become a reality, and that the dream, so to speak, can live on at the same time as the state itself. Israel is a personal challenge, a personal religious issue. It is a call to every one of us as an individual, a call which one cannot answer vicariously. The ultimate meaning of the State of Israel must be seen in terms of the vision of the prophets, the redemption of all. The religious duty of the Jew is to participate in the process of continuous redemption, in seeing that justice prevails over power, that awareness of God penetrates human understanding. One of the things that, quite frankly, I am probably most proud and pleased about in the course of my now 15-year tenure at the Union for Reform Judaism is a call I made, I think in 1999, to my friend and colleague Mark Rosenstein. And I said, people need a person to relate to in relationship to Israel. It's not enough just to read newspapers and the web and watch television, etc. We need to know a person. And that, for the last 11 or 12 years now, he has been writing a weekly diary, the Galilee Diary, in some measure in an echo in response to the very first line about Israel being a personal religious issue. and hopefully those of you who are participating in this webinar have had the opportunity to learn about, from, and with Mark at some points over the course of the last decade, and thereby made your relationship to Israel even more personal than it may have been otherwise. Next slide, please.
And just an aside, as we're making that transition, Rabbi Rosenstein will be at the URJ Biennial.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Here, their spiritual, religious, and political identity was shaped. Here, they first attained to statehood, created cultural values of national and universal significance, and gave to the world the eternal book of books. And quite frankly, here's another instance in which if anybody ever needs proof of there being really no such thing as translation, we have it in front of us. Yes, this is a commentary, this is an explanation of what is written in Hebrew, but we are reminded in the course of this Megillah, in the course of this declaration, in the course of this scroll, of the really miraculous resurrection of a language that in many instances had been subsumed, consumed, so that it became resumed, a language that had not been spoken for, in most instances, centuries. And here we are in the, at least literary presence of Eliezer ben Yehuda, who was ultimately almost singularly responsible for the revivification, for the rebirth of the state of Israel. And one of the words, ironically, that he created, or invented, if you will, is the word for identity in Hebrew, which he decided would be zehut. Zehut, if it could be translated as thisness, it's what makes this, what makes this unique. And here we are witnessing, in the context of creating the state of Israel, what it is that makes this state unique, this state, in that it being this document having been written in the Hebrew language. Next slide, please. Another sentiment of aspiration. We extend our hand to all neighboring states and their peoples in an offer of peace and good neighborliness, and appeal to them to establish bonds of cooperation and mutual help with the sovereign Jewish people settled in its own land. The state of Israel is prepared to do its share in a common effort for the advancement of the entire Middle East. I guess if there ever was a statement of aspiration that is continuously a struggle, this would be it. This is a slide entitled, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." This, of course, was the phrase that Rabbi Akiva argued was the most important principle of the Torah. It's addressed in the Torah to a singular person. And here, in the context of the Declaration of Independence, it isn't addressed to a singular person. It is really addressed to a singular state in the context of a neighborhood that is contentious, that has known, sadly, more war than, more milchama than shalom, more war than peace, especially in the context of the last few generations. And Yehuda Amichai here is a provider of yet another poetic aspiration of the kind of neighbor that Israel would seek to be and the kind of neighborhood that Israel would seek to be. Not the peace of an armistice or even the one of the vision of a wolf and the lamb, so not the Messiah, those of you who are asking about the Messiah, but as in your heart after an excitement to talk only of great weariness. And finally, the last bite, the last stanza, let it be like wildflowers, suddenly an imperative of the field, wild peace. Continue, please.
And we have about 1 minute left.
Yes, this is basically for us going to be our last slide, and we have juxtaposed a prayer and the end, really, of the Declaration of Independence. And apparently, the night before the Declaration was signed, there was at least one contentious argument that needed to be solved. The Declaration of the State of Independence, unlike certainly the Declaration of Independence of the United States, does not mention God explicitly. And there were those among the signers, among the 25 signatories, who argued that it must mention God. And a rabbi, Yehuda Maimon, suggested that perhaps a word that could function as a double entendre would serve the purpose. Sur Yisrael. So in the last paragraph, they added mitoch bitachon betzur Yisrael, which is here placing our trust in the rock of Israel. Sur Yisrael, kuma be'ezrat Yisrael, rock of Israel, rise in support of Israel, so that it allowed religious Jews to read into the Declaration of Independence a divine providence, and it allowed those people who are ardent in their secularism as Jews to relate to the rock of Israel as the strength of Israel, the power of the people of Israel, the power of the state of Israel. And with that double entendre, the last of the controversies was resolved, and we have the 25 signatories for the Declaration of the State of Israel. The last slide, which you can continue with on your own, is the prayer for the, or the next to last slide is about, I guess, both the good and the bad, the pain and the suffering, as well as the blessing and the joy of the State of Israel. The final slide is the prayer for the State of Israel, which has been again incorporated into Mishkan Tefillah, and with the sentiments expressed earlier about Mishkan, let it indeed, this book and this place, be one in which you feel at home and our people feels at home. Thank you very much for this opportunity to learn together.
And there was one final question. I know we're running over, but the question is, what was the reasoning for breaking up the document and putting it on different pages? Do you know?
The document, I suspect, is, and I know the full document, it's clearly much too long, and my sense is that that very consciously they wish to juxtapose this quote, secular state document with religious texts that span Jewish time in an effort to put it in a context and justify it being part of the Siddur.
Okay. Thank you very much. I hope you will continue to check out our website to register for the next webinar, which will be in November, and our teacher will be Yehudit Warchow, Central Shlicha for the Reform Movement. So have a great afternoon, and I hope you have been enriched by your time of study. Goodbye.